Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. A new study explores the perceptions surrounding unified sports. The research was done in partnership with Special Olympics Ontario and the University of Toronto's Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. Here to discuss the findings is head researcher Dr. Kelly Arbour-Nicitopoulos. Dr. Arbour-Nicitopoulos, thank you for your time this morning. I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, Dave, for having me.
So, before we get into some of the findings, I think there's an important definition here on some background. When the term unified sports is used, what does that mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So unified sports, it's based on the idea of having individuals with and without intellectual disabilities competing on the same sports teams. So traditionally, Special Olympics only offered sports programs for individuals with intellectual disabilities to compete within. The unified sports, which was initiated by Special Olympics International in 1988, as a way to challenge the stigma around intellectual disability by developing socially inclusive recreation opportunities for individuals of all abilities.
So your research was really taking a look at some of the perceptions surrounding unified sports. Why did you want to focus in that particular area?
Yeah, so my program of research really aims to explore how sport and more broadly physical activity can be more accessible and inclusive to persons who experience disability. I'm particularly interested in looking at different ways in which sport can be introduced to children who experience disability as early as possible. Now, the school setting is quite ideal from this perspective, bringing sport to where children are, which can address some of the barriers that exist to sport participation for children and youth who experience disabilities, such as having a lack of awareness and access to quality sport programs.
So as you engaged in this research, what were some of the key findings to come out of it?
Yeah, there's so much to share, but I guess in this short period of
time, please, on this one, take your time. Don't feel rushed on this one.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think it's important to note. So we had completed interviews with student athletes who experience intellectual disabilities, those who don't, and teachers who are coaches of these unified sport programs within schools. So our first key finding was that students with and without intellectual disabilities and teachers value the inclusive nature of unified sports. Many of the students and teachers spoke of the positive change in the school culture and attitudes towards inclusion, and that had been attributed to the change due to unified sports. Secondly, was that unified sports contributed to fostering friendships between students with and without intellectual disabilities, both within and outside of the unified sports programming school environment. Unified sports also provided students with leadership opportunities. Many times, though, this leadership role was emphasized for students without intellectual disabilities. And then I think thirdly, to highlight what the key finding was that coach training and dedicated time for unified sports within the school were mentioned by teachers as priority areas. Furthermore, there were times during the interviews when we would say othering language was used. For example, referring to students with intellectual disabilities as team helpers or quote unquote assistants. Now, this type of language can inadvertently portray students with intellectual disabilities as different or inferior from their peers without disabilities. And this really speaks to the need for building training in schools for students as well as teachers on disability inclusive language and practices.
To a certain degree, this ends up being out of your hands. But what are some of the practical applications that sports communities or sports organizations can take with this research? How can they apply your really important research and put it into action?
Yeah, oftentimes when we think of sport, we think of focus on performance, physical skill. And I think, yes, not to say unified sports, that doesn't happen. And the athletes, as well as the coaches, spoke of it, but also really the value of sports for fostering social connections among individuals with diverse abilities, using sport as a vehicle to drive social change within communities, especially in this case within the school and the school culture. And secondly, going back to that point I mentioned around coach training and language, really emphasizing within the sport community more coach training related to disability inclusion, such as use of language, providing meaningful role division on teams, and really focusing on sport-related skills and how coaches can work with each individual athletes at to where they're at. And that obviously becomes a very interesting process when you have these types of teams around unified sports with such diverse abilities on a team.
One of the things that I'm always yammering on about on the show is continuity. And it's really neat because you and I had a chance to talk last summer about something different in the space of inclusive sport. Anecdotally, I'm observing the sports world is becoming more inclusive, but I'm sure you're a little bit closer to the beat on this one. What are you observing as time's passed, maybe in the last decade or so, in terms of the landscape of inclusion in sport for athletes of diverse abilities?
Yeah, there is a lot happening. I definitely would say still a lot to improve upon, but I think in terms of the positives, I guess from my own perspective, working with different organizations and individuals, I receive quite frequently emails, requests around what resources are available, coach training, and disability inclusion. And I think that's really important. And it's nice to hear where people wanting to learn more, want to educate themselves, not relying on athletes who experience disability having to self-advocate all the time. That's just very burdensome. So I think that is a positive that we're seeing a shift at an organizational level of looking at resources available or training to support coaches within the system. Now, I think being mindful of that, I think it's important that I want to highlight where we still need to move the needle. And we really need to consider that, despite these positive changes we found in the school culture and attitudes in our research around inclusive sports, more needs to be done within schools in Canada to devote greater resources and priority for inclusive sports. Without the additional resources and support from administration and school boards, it makes it difficult for teachers who are so committed to their students to be able to prioritize and commit additional and, may I say, volunteer time to these extracurricular initiatives.
Yeah, it's that notion of the hodgepodge, right? That like policy can help you with the hodgepodge. And it's not to imply that there are not certain individuals who are doing amazing work inside that hodgepodge. But when you're talking about collective inclusion, you need to have some kind of policy in place, or as you say, resources in place to offer assistance to people, to guide them, guidelines, guiding principles.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like going back to that playground, even to this work, I think like looking at those pockets of opportunities, school is a huge pocket. We need to think about devoting those resources, time and money to make this happen. That's where our students are. That's where our children are. And I think it's a really great opportunity. And this is what this study really demonstrates, the opportunity and the want for these types of programs.
Dr. Arbour-Nicitopoulos, it's always so nice to chat with you. Let's try to do this more than once a year.
Okay, I'm up for it.
That's Dr. Kelly Arbour-Nicitopoulos, an associate professor at the University of Toronto. Her study on the perceptions of unified sports was published in Adapted Physical Activity Quarterly. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.